Buddy, it's 6 o'clock. We have a committee meeting, as you well know, because you're here. Hopefully, you all have a copy of the agenda. It also has a handout as well as a copy of the legislation as it is currently introduced. And what I'd like to do is give a short introduction because I don't want to take too much time because the main function of this meeting is to get citizen input. So I do want to kind of set the stage for this, that obviously we're covering Ordinance 9196, and it's the goal of this meeting is to obtain input to further define the problem, identify potential trade-offs, and discern community preferences. And that's those three components are there for a reason. And what I would like is, there's several different ways to approach this kind of a meeting. And what I very much would like is that it is a working session. It's something where we roll up our sleeves, if we're not wearing short sleeves, we roll up our sleeves and try and come up with defining the problem and a multifaceted solution. Legislation's part of it. And I do not want you to get the impression that the administration is trying to force something on the community. What we have here is a community discussion where we all have a part to play in fashioning something that will fit our community. So this is a step in the process. The goal isn't to just go through the motions. The goal here is to come up with something that does provide balance. And so to continue to set the stage, what I'd like is for the administration to take a few moments. And again, we want to spend most of the time getting your input, but a few moments to talk about the rationale, the goal, and the background on what kind of research has been done. This is not something that was put together by the administration like that. There was a lot of research that went on. And then some legal aspects of it. But before I turn it over to Amanda for the first part of that, I want to give my colleague, Jeff Dennis, a chance to make any comments.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Then please, Amanda, take it away.
Thanks, Bill. I don't think it'll be any secret to the folks in this room, but according to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, more than 75% of our United States wildlife population lives in urban areas. This means that they're continuing to live within habitat available in our parks, our undeveloped parcels of land, vacant lots, and of course in our backyards. Their presence can provide recreational and educational viewing opportunities. And of course, for many, it's very exciting when they pay us a visit in our backyards. And we find quite a bit of joy when we get to experience nature in this way. However, it is important that we do our best to minimize conflict with wildlife as much as possible. And over the past couple of years, complaints from residents relating to wildlife have continued to increase. And while the turkeys became the poster children for this, they're not the only animal that we receive concerns about. Deer destroying landscape, lying sick and dying in backyards, increased population with risk to vehicles, etc., nuisance issues involving raccoons, skunks, and others, and of course, as I mentioned, most recently escalating with the very publicized issue with the turkeys. The city has also been receiving numerous complaints from the neighbors of those who are extensively feeding wildlife in their backyards and creating nuisance issues for those surrounding addresses. Several months ago, we began working with and meeting with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, ODNR for short. ODNR wildlife officers and Division 2 managers were in the community quite a bit as we were experiencing the issues with the turkeys who had become habituated and were aggressively chasing after folks visiting the Wood County Hospital. They were starting to chase and attack postal workers on a daily basis who were delivering mail. So ODNR officers were literally escorting those postal carriers through different neighborhoods and were in our community on foot for several days while that whole issue was being sort of addressed. And I think it's no secret they were here trying to net a couple of those male birds. As they were walking in several neighborhoods, they identified locations that were extensively feeding wildlife, and this goes beyond a bird feeder or two. They also determined that the 3 male turkeys who had been chasing people were doing so because they had become a bit habituated, and the number one reason for this to occur is from people feeding them. When wild animals are fed by people, they begin to lose their fear of people, identify them as a food source, and in this case, it led to aggressive behavior from these birds. The ODNR representatives highly recommended that the city adopt an ordinance prohibiting wildlife feeding and provided the city with an example ordinance from Dublin, Ohio. The draft proposed ordinance was modeled almost word for word from this ordinance provided to us by ODNR. In addition to the ordinance, we've been working with ODNR officials to launch an educational campaign, which includes an urban wildlife webpage, social media posts, e-news articles, and educational flyers. And this information goes beyond the no feeding guidelines. This includes recommendations for helping sick, injured, orphan wildlife, and additional recommendations for coexisting with our local wildlife. We want to be very clear that the city does not hate wildlife. And in fact, it is the exact opposite. People who feed wildlife usually have good intentions, but are unaware of the long and short-term consequences of providing supplemental food. I'll go through some of them. Feeding is especially dangerous for young animals that will habituate to people, may become dependent on humans for food, and may not learn to hunt or forage on their own. It changes wildlife behavior, which often leads to conflicts and unsafe situations for the animals and the people. Feeding leads to higher concentration of animals and interaction with other species, and in these higher population concentrations, diseases spread more rampantly. And I will say that when we met with ODNR, disease spreading and the wildlife behavior were probably the 2 biggest concerns that they had. The list does go on, but in almost all cases, the animal does not win. We've adopted the tagline on a lot of our education that you'll be seeing or has already posted, love them wild, leave them wild. And to clear up some confusion with the proposed ordinance, yes, residents may still feed songbirds. No, residents will not be cited if a deer eats a garden or drinks out of a bird bath, or if an animal other than a bird eats from the bird feeder. The proposed ordinance is really meant to discourage what we've been calling wildlife buffets that have been placed with the intention to attract and feed wildlife, things like salt licks, corn, peanuts on the ground, bowls of food, hot dogs, etc. As Bill mentioned, we realize this is a very complex and often passionate topic for many of us. We have been listening to and gathering feedback from the community. We do have some recommendations for amending the ordinance, and City Attorney Hunter Brown will be reviewing some of those proposed edits with us this evening. So I'll turn it over to Hunter.
Thank you. Again, in looking at this, this was drafted after a community who had implemented it theoretically successfully for a while. So that was why it was worded the way it is because it had already been used by a place to success. That being said, there are a couple changes that I would recommend just based on community feedback and in my experience with the law. The first would be, I think we need to add a mens rea element to this. So to be clear, if this were a murder charge, when you say mens rea, you'd be talking about the part that says you should not intentionally kill someone, right? So typically when you're legislating something that has some sort of penalty to it, you add a mens rea element to it. And my suggestion would be to add knowingly. So it would read, no person shall knowingly feed. that would go a little further towards the fact that we would have to show some sort of intent on the party of the feeding. So if some animal came by and just ate your stuff, it's not your fault, that kind of thing. The second thing I would suggest would be to remove the first instance under Part B of the words running at large. So you'd reword that so it would read, no person shall knowingly feed, cause to be fed, or provide food for animals, provide food for wild animals on any private or public property. I think that would better feed into the mens rea element because you're removing the part that has to do with animals coming onto your property. I would leave the second one, which would speak to your intentionally feeding animals that would come from a neighbor's property for purposes of drawing them to your property. The other thing I wanted to mention was, before I get there, we also discussed briefly removing squirrels, but that's less of a legal recommendation and one more based on community input, but I would leave that more to the politicians. But the other thing I wanted to mention was I wanted to speak briefly to enforcement. Whenever you're crafting a law like this, the law is only good to the extent of the practicality of its enforcement. And the idea behind this law, as we've crafted it, was to wrap it into our civil citation system. Now, anyone who's read it will notice that there is obviously a minor misdemeanor citation available for it, which would technically make it a criminal offense, and that is true. Everything that's citable in our civil citation system has a minor misdemeanor version of it that's citable too. So your trash cans in front of your house, that's a possible minor misdemeanor. Typically, we cite those as civil citations, and that is the goal here. I can't imagine us going out stomping on people's property and arresting people for minor misdemeanors for this type of thing, especially not on the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth offense. I mean, this is something that would go the criminal route, I imagine, only after a long line of people disobeying it. So again, the idea is that it's part of the civil system. And if you don't like the civil system, the judge who created it is sitting in the back row. So, any questions?
Thank you, Hunter. Again, I thought that it would be helpful to each of you that wish to speak to know that some of the background. I also wanted to take a moment to thank the individuals that did send me emails. And I can tell you that some of the common themes were bird feeders and also enforcement, as well as whether this is some scope, whether this is something that is overreach for the community. So some of these were addressed by Hunter, but at this point, we're on to the main event. And in terms of speaking, you have the opportunity. We have a hard stop at 6:47 because we have a 7 o'clock council meeting. So we may or may not get through everyone. If we need to, we'll have another meeting. And there's also the opportunity, you always have the opportunity at city council meetings to speak to the full council about anything, and that's during lobby visitations. With council meetings, the procedure is to sign up prior to the meeting to put your name that you wish to speak. We're not going to do that here, and there's not going to be a time limit. But please take a moment to look around and see that there's a number of people that do wish to speak. So brevity would be appreciated, but not required. And you do not have to sign in. But please, when you come to the podium, clearly state your name and address, and then state what you'd like. Who would like to go first? Please, Mr. Beaverson.
Okay. I'm Richard Beaverson, 323 North Church Street. This is my wife, Maxine Beaverson, 323 North Church Street. And we have a few suggestions that when we're titling this, Saving Backyard Wild Animals. We've got suggestions for that may help, just drop the ordinance. Number one. Number two, replace the animal control person. Number three, need deer crossing signs, obey the speed limit on Wooster. Number four, deer coming into the town from Winter Garden Park. Can Winter Garden Park be improved? Number five, this ordinance if it passes, the law-abiding people would be breaking the law to feed the backyard animals. Number six, we the people should never be put in the position to break the law. And I am representing 114 people with signatures, which may be voters, may not, but they're all from Bowling Green.
Mr. Beaverson, thank you, and thank you, Mrs. Beaverson, for all the time that you put into putting the petition together. It would be helpful if you could get a copy to the clerk of council, or you can give her yours, and then she'll get it back to you. And if you could, Mrs. Beaverson, if you could take a picture of that poster and send it to me, I'd appreciate it. I didn't bring my phone with me, which shows I'm old. Okay, thank you. Second, who'd like to go next? And there is not a requirement that each person that speaks gets over 100 signatures before they speak.
Matthew Rieger, 540 West Worcester. What I'm calling is the fact of the matter is, I don't like squirrels. I don't like deer in my backyard. I don't like any of these animals in my backyard, and I love the fact that my neighbor's cat runs wild and kills all the squirrels, so that's fine with me. But the fact of the matter is while I'm here I'm trying to at least bring some amount of consideration about the proliferation of law, proliferation of ordinances. I think sometimes when a problem comes to a city, the idea is that the way to solve it is through legislation. And it seems that way sometimes. But I'm wondering if some of the standard that we apply, and Mr. Dennis, you can, when you hear these words, you'll understand. When we have legislation that affects a constitutional right, we consider it in a compelling state interest standard, seeing whether or not there's a least restrictive means. And so the question is this legislation the least restrictive means of addressing the problem? The problem is wildlife that is proliferating throughout the city and causing problems and affecting people and endangered lives. We don't want that. But is this the least restrictive means to addressing the problems? It sounds like you've done education, which is great, which I knew the city would. This city always handles things in the best and most efficient manner. But the fact of the matter is that maybe what we need to do is give that a chance, give it the ability to take place, and then consider this legislation if it becomes so necessary. I think also I want to tell you that this particular legislation could put the prosecutor in a tough situation between neighbors who disagree, and it can be used as a method of attacking neighbors between. I've seen that in 20 years as a prosecutor. I saw that legislation, for example, one of my first cases was a cat at large. The issue wasn't about a cat at large, it was that the neighbors didn't like the other neighbor. And that's what became the issue. Next, and other thing to consider too is, does 90.14 already address this? 90.14 of the city code indicates it shall be unlawful for any person to keep, maintain, or have in his or her possession or under his or her control within the city and it goes on to wild animals. And the listed animals include deer and squirrels as animals that would be under 90.14, wild or dangerous animals prohibited. Well, squirrels, for some reason, under this are considered dangerous, and so are deer, or at least in the list of animals. It's worth at least looking. Now, if you do consider the legislation, I think all of the proposals that the city attorney has proposed are great. He knows what he's doing. He is doing it from a perspective of experience, and I think those are very good. My whole point is consider the legislation in the idea of, first, is this the least restrictive means to accomplish what you want to do? And is there a compelling state interest to impose this? Although that standard may not apply from a constitutional standard, it may apply from a perspective from the Declaration of Independence of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Linda Barber, resident of Bowling Green for over 27 years, West Wooster Street resident. I have just, these are more suggestions because we are not unique in the United States of the urban areas, the towns and cities, trying to find a balance between wildlife and humans, and it's a delicate balance. I think because the dialogue has been opened up today, this is a good opportunity for our city planners to look ahead at ways to mitigate the damage to wildlife and still keep our city safe. There are tremendous opportunities. Anybody that gets National Wildlife Magazine, all these things, they have all kinds of suggestions and things that have worked in other towns and cities that will make the wildlife better and not coming in so much to the city, although they'll have green areas and habitat spread throughout, but we would know where those are at because we would have some control over how that's designed. One of the big things they talk about now is with the big corporations and businesses that have maybe enough money to do some things can take some of their land that they mow and turn into nice wildlife places. So these little people have a place to raise their families, their babies, and they can live in peace. And I can't say that they won't, get out and take a walk somewhere that we don't plan on them being. But I think it's up to us as the human beings and those of us, we're in control of what happened to the animals in many aspects. So I think it behooves us to try to plan ahead with the months and years ahead, because this is not going to go away. We're not going to have less animals. We're going to have more because of their loss of habitat and more people. So we can find a good balance. And I think that we really need to work on that. Those that plan the things for the city, we can make our city a model. And we should do that because this is a progressive city. We've got a lot to be proud of. And I think that including this in our planning will make us a model for the rest of the state. Not that that's the main objective, but it gives other people ideas, smaller towns, things that they can do too to make life better for humans and the wildlife. So that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. If there's a really good specific article that summarizes a lot of what you said,
The articles that I brought with me.
yeah, if you could leave a copy for the clerk to
Sure.
make copies, I'd be
Who do I
very-
give that to?
Right there, Jody.
Okay, I can do that.
I
Okay.
appreciate it because
Yeah,
I want
okay,
to read
thanks.
more about
Sure.
it.
Okay,
Thank you. Next.
My name is Pam Day. My husband Frank and I have lived at 936 North Grove Street in the 4th Ward, Bowling Green, for the past 44 years. The proposed outdoor feeding ordinance has caused many Bowling Green citizens to feel uneasy, uncomfortable, and even rebellious. A practice on their personal property which they previously viewed as a way to enjoy and commune with nature A way to appreciate God's creation and a way to escape the stress in our society has suddenly become a bone of contention in our wonderful town. The information that Amanda and Hunter gave was really helpful, and I also appreciated the comments by the other speakers. I believe we can work together to make this ordinance more reasonable, more commonsensical, and more palatable to all of our citizens. I'd like to ask our city council members to consider these suggestions and questions. The ordinance as it now stands seems far too reaching to many of us. Let's be sure it addresses the actual problems, which seem primarily to be aggressive male wild turkeys during mating season, deer eating bushes and plants, and stray cats. Are possible solutions to these problems currently being explored and carried out? Or, as Matt suggested, are we using the least restrictive means to solve this problem? In practice, could the ordinance specify enforcement only after preliminary steps have been taken by city officials, such as a notice of complaint by neighbors, an explanation to a property owner as to why their wildlife feeding is causing issues, or a series of warnings, which I think Hunter also talked about? And finally, let's remember that we all benefit from living in harmony with nature's wildlife, our neighbors, and fellow Bowling Green citizens. As the 8th century philosopher Immanuel Kant said, we can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of enforcement, I believe that a possible analogy would be there's certain requirements for recycling, and if somebody violates that, there's of course ongoing education, but if that happens, then there's a notice sent out, and it's not like the hammer comes down immediately. It provides the requirements provide clarity for communication. This is what's expected, and then also the way that it is enforced is basically the goal isn't to be punitive. The goal is to show people what the requirements are. And I would envision that the way that this would be implemented, and to the extent that it can be incorporated into the ordinance, but it would be similar, where if there was something where somebody was violating it, it would be a series of warnings and education to bring the person into compliance. In terms of there being an ordinance with civil infractions, et cetera, you've all heard the speak softly and carry a big stick. If the education has as a hopefully never ever done component, that might be a motivator for people. And so the enforcement's a very important part, and it's something that's gone through a lot of the discourse that I've seen, and it's worthy of that, to be sure, but it's not meant to be punitive. And so, and I don't want to take any more time, but basically, thank you so much for those that have spoken thus far, because you've been very clear, succinct, which I always admire, and have really taken the spirit of trying to figure out how we can tackle this. So that's a breather until the fifth person speaks. So who's next?
I just have a couple questions, too. I'm Gail Vio. I'm at 1121 Charles Street. With the matter of how you're going to police this and monitor this, we don't have animal control. So are you relying on neighbors to complain about neighbors? Is that how you're going to know who the offenders are? Right now, you said or Amanda said there's just she said on the news, there's just a few residences that are the problem. If it's just a few residents, why can't you just address those with those residences? And then the part here, B, about feeding the birds, it's the exception to feed the birds, as long as it does not attract animals running at large, wild, blah, 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 blah. If you have two bird feeders in your yard, you put bird seed in it, deer, raccoon, possum, skunks, they all eat that. They like that. So you put that out to enjoy the birds, and at night, the deer come through. They're not going to leave as long as you have the bird feeders there. So I think this part of this ordinance is a little unrealistic. So I think that was it. So my big thing is how you're going to monitor this and police this. If you're going to issue misdemeanors for it, who's going to be the one to do that, or how you're going to do that? Because probably most of the stuff's in the backyard, where you feed the birds. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very good questions.
Well, rather than leave them float, can we get an answer from our legal counsel to those questions?
I was going to ask if I could speak to that, actually.
Please.
They are good questions, especially when you're talking about the backyard, right? Because the city, for whatever that means, us, can't generally see into backyards, especially if there's fences and a large property and all that. This would be technically a crime like anything else would be, and therefore it would fall under the same standards of proof that any other citable crime would. And to that regard, you would rely on neighbors reporting like you would for most crimes. So yes, this would turn it to relying on a neighbor to report on another, which sounds very East Berlin-y, but that's the way our criminal justice system has always been. Also, I would note, you see a crime happen, you call the police. That's just the way it works. The government, for whatever that means, can't be everywhere and see everything. So we have always relied upon witness testimony. The idea behind this originally was to wrap it into our civil system, as I said before, which does have a lower burden of proof than if we would cite it in the criminal system as the minor misdemeanor that it is. I would also note that there is no enhancer in the criminal version. So some cities and some crimes say, if you do this the first time, it's an MM, minor misdemeanor. If you do it again in a year, it's a M4, misdemeanor to the fourth degree. We didn't do that because the idea was that if this would ever be pursued, it would probably fall under the civil system anyway.
Did that answer the questions?
So there was another question about bird feeders feeding deer, right? I guess just to underscore, because I've gotten this piece of feedback as well, there is a difference if I intentionally hit somebody with my car or if I accidentally
I was going to
run
say
over
that
them.
the recommended suggestion to add the mens rea element of knowingly in there, I think would address that, right? Because now we're talking about putting out a bird feeder with the intention of feeding birds that maybe will attract deer versus, say, putting out a salt lick that will cause deer to trample across your neighbor's yard. The intention element's different.
Did that answer the questions? Okay, cool. Next. Ms. Leakey, do you want to speak?
My name is Vasiliki Leontis. I live North Summit, 119 North Summit Street. And I looked over the draft of this ordinance, and I also looked at the website of the city, and I found this information that Amanda talked about at first. Namely, that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has stated that more than 75% of the U.S. wildlife population lives in urban areas, and that the growth of cities and subdivisions has displaced some wildlife. First of all, some means from 99% to 0%, let's say 1%, okay? And everything in between. All right, whatever. So, in other words, there is a probably considerable amount of wildlife that lives around urban areas or comes into urban areas. And that's because you will accept, I suppose, just like the website says or the Department of Natural Resources has stated, that our cities have grown have developed enough to encroach on wildlife habitats. And of course, they're going to get out of there and come to wherever they can find enough food resources, because they have to somehow live. And I believe they have the right to exist, just like we do, humans. All right. Now, having said all this, let's get to how this legislation has been drafted. I would be very pleased, I guess, if I found some trace of concern about wildlife itself. The only reflection of concern in this legislation is about human beings, citizens of urban areas. The only little kind of trace I find that reflects a little bit of concern is this part that talks about the change in in those animals' foraging behavior. And, that's due to human beings feeding those animals. I'm sure when you feed the animals, yes, they will change their foraging behavior. But just also understand that this change of foraging behavior is also because of our encroachment onto their habitats. So I don't have really a solution to these problems, to this issue, but I would like to inject this legislation with a bit of more positive attitude towards wildlife, which apparently is really left to fend for itself. And now, I think we should, okay, I'm not going to say feed those animals, fine. Sometimes I plant a garden with lots of tomatoes and whatever, vegetables. If these animals come to my garden, do I feed them? I don't take out platters of food, but I provide the very things that they love to eat, okay? So apparently under this legislation, I feed those animals because I give them exactly what they want, fresh. And so there's that. Also, I have 3 cats. I don't place, little necklaces around their necks because they will choke somewhere. And sometimes they get out because they're cats, and everybody wants to get out, right? So these are animals at large. Perhaps one might consider them animals at large, and yet they're not really, they're mine. So how do you account for these animals of mine or other people's who are not really at large? Should the neighbors, grab them and do whatever? I don't know. And the third point is this. If you would like to pass this legislation, okay, but at least bring about some balance. What do I mean by this? A trade-off. Someone talked about trade-offs, all right? I am in favor of trying to protect wildlife. I hope that by prohibiting the feeding of wildlife, you're also trying to protect it, right? I think. Okay. How about protecting wildlife from those people who just cannot pass up an opportunity to kill? They'll go out with the guns immediately as soon as someone says, okay, well, I was attacked, or the so-and-so was attacked by the turkey. The turkey, by the way, tries to protect its own nest, habitat, whatever, because it's got to live somewhere. And reproduce somewhere. So out come the guns. Can you also legislate against shooting or poisoning or whatever, trapping these animals? I don't think this kind of shooting, killing, poisoning behavior is very good. It's brutalizing for everybody, brutalizes people, brutalizes animals, right? I think. And I guess that's all I have to say. Just those 3 points. Thanks.
Thank you.
Time for one more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My name is Connie Cadwallader. I live on Ferndale Court. The reason these animals are coming in town, and I have nothing against farmers, but the farmers, when you drive east, north, south, whatever direction, bare land, a small plot of trees, another small plot of trees. These wild animals would love to have a forest. And I know we all need to eat, farmers need to farm. But if we could get some trees to grow that the wildlife would determine was their safe place. End of discussion.
My name is Chris Haar. I live at 482 South Church Street. And I've been a volunteer for the city parks, the county parks in Wood County and Lucas County. It is not a matter of just of habitat. I volunteered for the Metro Parks when they started doing a deer call out at Oak Companies. There's lots of space there. There are just too many deer. We do not have a natural predator. Coyotes are not big enough. I can't answer to whether or not maybe Amanda, our woodchucks and raccoon, if they are larger than we would expect for the, is it higher density? But we know that research shows the density is just way too high. Deer colors are not popular. We don't like them, but there are consequences for having an animal that does not have a predator, and that's it.
My name is Melissa Schaefer. I live at 921 Sunset Drive. I'd like to address the change in the ordinance about knowingly. I have a good example, and I think, first of all, I'd like to preface, I'm unsure about the ordinance. I'm not sure. But I have a good example about knowingly versus not. I think planting a garden and animals getting into your garden is not, I mean, even if you plant it for the purpose of attracting animals, that would be hard to prove. Whereas I have a neighbor, and if they're in here, I'm probably making myself a target, but I have a neighbor who knowingly sets out about 6 to 8 bowls in a row of dry corn and a kiddie pool of water. And I sit and I watch the deer come down my street, go directly to his front yard or her front yard. I enjoy seeing the deer, but I just worry that what would happen if that neighbor suddenly is not there anymore, or for whatever reason stops feeding the deer. I just, that's an example of knowingly. I mean, that's pretty obvious to me that they knowingly set out food. And I've also read that dried corn is not good for the deer, actually. I don't know, somebody else probably knows better than I. But that's a good example of knowingly versus not knowing.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's 6:46, and we do need enough time for setting up for the 7 o'clock council meeting. And I can tell you that every minute past 6:47, there's more concern, but I don't want to close it off because it's still not 6:47. So if somebody else would like to speak, please speak. Again, you have the opportunity, you always have the opportunity to email and phone and so forth, individual city council members or us as a group. You have the opportunity as well with city council meetings for lobby visitation. We have received a lot of really good information from you all. I appreciate it. It's something that we want to, at least I want to just kind of mull over and see if there's a way forward that can incorporate a lot of the suggestions and concerns. So I don't personally have any action to be taken, but I do want to give Jeff a chance to speak as well.
I'm just here to listen.
Okay. As far as next steps, tonight, the legislation will have its second reading. It will not have its third reading if I have anything to do with it, and I really don't think it would. So we have some more time. Its third reading would be the very next council meeting. We do have the opportunity, if we do not feel that the issue has been resolved, to table it as long as we're very judicious about how to table it, because we can't retable it. So that's where we're at right now. Are there any questions any of you have before? Yes?
Is there a copy of the draft ordinance online somewhere?
Yes, I think, but also it's attached to the agenda.
I think they've been distributed.
Oh, yeah, well, leave your name and address and we'll definitely get it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. But it should be online as well.
Actually, on the city's website, we are posting agendas and the draft legislation. So it was first introduced at the last meeting, which was May 20th. So if you go to City Council's webpage on the city's website and go to the May 20th meeting and open the PDF, the draft is there. I believe it's pages 6 and 7. Yeah. So you can find it there also. Sure.
Anything else? Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and stay tuned.